Hello, I'm Nicholas Heyer, and this is my oral presentation on my research from this semester on the retrofitability of carbon capture, utilization, and storage technologies. Just an agenda, an overview of carbon capture, utilization, and storage, the case for retrofit, the risks in retrofit, and a discussion on cost evaluation models. So an overview, CCUS technologies, group of technologies that do exactly what their title says. They are to capture carbon emissions, or they're to utilize capture carbon in some way, or to store it geologically and permanently. So when you're talking about retrofit, you're usually talking about a power plant or a steel or cement or some other heavy industry production plant, and you're installing a post-combustion carbon capture equipment somewhere in the slipstream usually at the end of the pipe, the flue stack there. But in the case for retrofit, a lot of these decisions they're predominantly just a cost analysis. So the first thing to discuss then is cost. So the cost of capture per ton of carbon dioxide is one of the biggest metrics at the end of the balance sheet here, the assessments. And with today's technologies, you're looking at about $30 to $70 per ton of carbon dioxide. But it's key to note that this includes capital expenditure, the initial cost. This includes operational costs. This includes a lot of different factors that kind of get rolled up in there. And so it is a wide range, and it varies widely depending on the exact circumstances of the retrofit project. So, but one thing that is steady is this the expansion to IRS tax code 45Q, which is the carbon credits, that it raised the price of the carbon credits from 10 to 20 to 35 to $50 per ton of carbon dioxide. And so $35 is in the case that you're going to capture the carbon and then sell it, say for enhanced oil recovery, then the tax credit is $35. But if you're just going to store it geologically, then it's 50. And there's an important business case about this, because in the case of enhanced oil recovery in the US, it's about $20 per ton. So your total revenue is at about $55 under that case. And then to store it, it costs about $10 per ton. So your total revenue is about $40 per ton under that case. And so aiming towards net zero, we have these two figures here I wanted to point out. 600 gigatons, that's the amount of carbon dioxide that would be emitted if we retrofitted none of the plants in the inventory in the world today for carbon capture. And we just let them run as they are today until the end of their lifespans. By 2070, we would emit an additional 600 gigatons of carbon dioxide. And then if we do hit net zero goals, then it's important to know that under those sustainable development scenarios, there's still almost 3 gigatons of carbon dioxide from industrial emissions that can't be abated, that need to be offset. And carbon capture, utilization, and storage technologies are really the only way to do that. And so they are critical to the path, and they also are the critical path because they're probably one of the longest development timelines. I mean, these technologies will continue to develop and advance all the way through 2070 and beyond. And so today, there's 135 of these facilities in development or operation around the world today. But to get to the goals of the Paris Agreement and limiting global warming to 1.5 degrees, we will need to commission 70 to 100 carbon capture facilities a year. And so where does that leave us, without retrofit? What are the other choices? Well, you can retire prematurely whatever that inventory of plants are. It costs a lot of money to do that, and most of them won't realize return on their capital expenditure up front. You can modify those plants. Sometimes you can retrofit existing plants to operate at a lower capacity for cheaper than you can for carbon capture. But they're still emitting carbon dioxide and other greenhouse gases in that case. You can revise or just remit climate goals, just give up on the hopes of anything in the Paris Agreement, or you can subsidize more and increase the business case while the technologies are still high. And so then the risks in retrofit, I lump them under these four categories here: cost, uncertainty, technology, and location. But cost is a big one. These are capital intensive projects. It's not cheap to install them. The scope of the retrofit is not cheap. You'll have to both make modifications to the existing plant and probably do a couple additions. And then it will have an effect on the operating costs of the plant. Could impact the productivity of the plant depending on the technology that you use. And then the plant lifespan matters too, because the payback period, depending on the industry and the plant, is kind of 20 to 25 years. It used to be 30 to 35 years, but it's come down since then. And a cement plant only has a lifespan of about 30 to 50 years. So given the age of the inventory of the plants, it might not make sense. It might make sense to either decommission it early or just modify it and make it run at a lower output. But then there's a lot of uncertainty in the demand for the market and what the market prices will do around carbon. If you increase the price of whatever that commodity is, then you risk having the demand for that leak overseas, and as well as the carbon emissions could leak overseas to a less regulated market. And credit risk is high, and the payback period is short. So there's always a risk of default in that, especially if something goes wrong unforeseen. These technologies, a lot of them are emerging kind of all at once between now and really 2030. And that puts a lot of choices out there that people don't really have the data to make those decisions about. And a lot of these are still at low technology readiness levels, which of course increases the indirect cost by contingency planning. And then the compatibility. So determining what is the best available technology, most compatible and suitable for the plant that's being retrofitted. And then location, the characteristics of the surrounding industry, the market that implies what kind of energy resources are available, and then whether or not there's access to the infrastructure for transport and storage, or what kind of regulatory or incentive structure are around that market. And so that leaves us with a scenario where the current cost evaluation models just aren't up to task. And by using these more simplistic models, we really are limiting and constraining the amount of retrofit proposals that will be accepted. And we won't meet the milestones necessary at 2030 and 2050 to realize net zero goals and the Paris Climate Agreement. And so to that end, there were four kind of classes of models I looked at in this research that could help with these decisions to retrofit or not to retrofit. The first one comes from the SEMCAP projects in Europe, predominantly in Norway, but also in Germany and Belgium. And so this was under a Horizon 2020 funded project, but in these references I have here, they laid out some very detailed techno-economic assessments that are a lot better, a lot more mature in their what factors they account for. Indexing, it gives us the ability to make apples to apples comparisons between green apples and red apples. And so I pointed out two here that I found could be pretty useful: the Green Retrofitability Index and this idea of how close is a city to achieving a green economy. Intrusion, these are some models that come out of MIT, but they're measuring like a quotient for how invasive that technology is to the existing market or system, and then how complex it is. And then the last one is multi-objective evolutionary algorithms, which talk about how to create a hybrid look between exploring new technologies and then selecting down. And that's really what that's all about. But those are very advanced analytics that could be pretty helpful. And so then I had this little snapshot of a quote from the Heidelberg sustainability commitments about the necessity for carbon capture technologies and why they are focusing on them. But you know, Holcim and the other large companies, they all have it too listed. And so then that's it. So in conclusion, we don't get to net zero without retrofitting. We just can't do it. We can't build enough plants fast enough, and it doesn't make economic sense to decommission the plants to build them. The best practices that we have right now, especially for cost analysis, just aren't good enough. So we need to look across the aisle and look in different silos to see what analytical models are out there to help make these decisions. There's a lot of good precedent for that came out of the renewable energy and solar, and you know, those technologies are a couple decades ahead of CCUS. So, and then and that of course leads to the last point, where the new analytics for decision support. So, thanks.